The phone was still in my hand when the world stopped making sense. Not the world outside. That kept going. A car passed on the street. The refrigerator hummed. A glass of water sat on the counter exactly where I had left it, catching the afternoon light like nothing had happened. Like everything had not just come apart in the space of a single sentence from a voice I did not recognize. Declan was gone. Not missing. Not hospitalized. Gone. A cardiac event, the voice said. Fast. He would not have felt it coming. I stood in my kitchen holding a warm phone and I did not scream. I did not reach for a chair. I sat down the way you sit when you are afraid of what you might do if you do not control the descent. Carefully, deliberately, like a woman making sure she does not break anything on the way down. My name is Winifred Morrow. I am 61 years old, and I have spent the last 32 years building something with my bare hands and refusing to let anyone decide what it meant. I raised my son alone in Birmingham, Alabama, and I watched him become something this city had never seen before and will not forget. Declan had cerebral palsy. It affected the way his body moved, the slight drag in his left leg, the way his hand sometimes curved inward when he was tired. It never once touched the way his mind worked. From the time he was 9 years old, he could look at a problem and find the seam in it before anyone else in the room knew there was one. The world spent years deciding what his disability meant for his ceiling. He spent those same years building a floor they could not see coming. He had this habit, only I knew it, of tapping his right thumb against whatever surface he was sitting near when he was thinking something through. A table edge, a car door, his own knee. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. Always that rhythm. In every meeting, every negotiation, every moment before a decision that mattered. I used to watch his hand and know before he opened his mouth that he had already found the answer. I will never hear that rhythm again. If you are watching this right now, whatever time it is, wherever you are, I need you to stay with me. Drop the time in the comments. This story is going to ask something of you, and I do not want you to be alone in it. By the time the business press ran their tributes that week, Declan Morrow was being called a visionary, a pioneer, a self-made man who built a company valued at $150 million from nothing. Every word was true. What none of those articles knew, what no one outside of one office and one attorney knew, was that the foundation of everything Declan represented had my name on it. Not his. Mine. I had not finished yet. I was still building toward the moment I would hand it to him completely. A formal transfer, a milestone, something that matched what he meant. That moment never came. And in the days that followed, I would learn that grief does not arrive alone. Sometimes it holds the door open for something colder, something that has been waiting in the dark for exactly this kind of news. I did not know yet that his death was going to bring someone out of 30 years of silence, but I would find out before the week was over. Declan was 11 years old the first time I watched someone look through him. Not at him, through him. The way you look through a window when what you are interested in is on the other side. It was a Saturday program, an enrichment class for gifted children at a learning center on the east side of Birmingham. I had fought to get him in. His scores qualified him 3 times over. When we walked through the door that morning, a woman at the registration table looked at his gait, looked at the way his left hand rested against his side, and then looked up at me with an expression I had no word for then. I have won now. Pity dressed up as professionalism. She said perhaps he would be more comfortable in their supported learning track. Declan was standing right beside me. He heard every word. He did not flinch. He just looked at her the way he would spend the rest of his life looking at people who underestimated him. Steady, patient, almost kind. like he was giving them a moment to correct themselves before he moved on without them. I smiled at that woman. I enrolled him in the standard program. He finished at the top of it. But something shifted in me that morning that never shifted back. I spent the next 4 years quietly, building, not a business plan, something closer to a decision. I was going to create something that put my son at the center of a room and made it impossible for anyone to look through him again. Something that would force the world to reckon with what he actually was. I registered the company myself. I capitalized it from everything I had saved over 18 years of working. Every contract, every sacrifice, every year I chose the future over the present. I structured it carefully, with Prescott Briggs beside me every step, making sure every document was clean and every foundation was solid. I put Declan at the head of it, chairman, chief executive, the public face of everything we were building, because that was the point. I wanted his name on the door. I wanted his vision driving the decisions. I wanted people to sit across a conference table from my son and leave that room knowing they had encountered something they had not been prepared for. He was 23 years old when we opened. By the time he was 30, the company had outgrown every projection we had made. His instincts were extraordinary, not because I taught him the business, but because I gave him the space and he filled it with something I could not have designed. He hired well. He negotiated better. He had a way of reading a room that made people feel understood before he had said anything of substance. The world called him a self-made visionary. I never corrected anyone. What I had not done, what I was still preparing to do in the deliberate, careful way I do everything that matters, was complete the formal transfer of the foundational structure to him. It was planned, documented in my private estate plan. A milestone I was building toward the way you build, toward something sacred. A gift I was still wrapping because I wanted the moment to be worthy of what he had become. I was not finished yet. And then, one Tuesday morning, his heart stopped, and I was standing in my kitchen holding a warm phone, and the gift was still in my hands. What nobody knew, what I never had reason to explain to anyone, was that I had not finished yet. I was still building toward the day I would hand it to him completely. That day never came. And that fact was about to become the most important thing in the world. I was 4 days into burying my son when the doorbell rang. It was a Thursday morning. I had not slept. I was still in the clothes I had worn to Prescott's office the day before, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. I was not crying. I had moved past crying into something quieter and more permanent. The kind of stillness that settles in when grief stops being a wave and becomes the water you are living in. I opened the door. 30 years is a long time. Long enough for a man to go gray at the temples and fill out through the chest and learn how to stand like someone who has practiced looking entitled. Harlow Dupree had done all three. He was dressed carefully, not in mourning, in presentation. Dark jacket, pressed shirt. A man beside him I did not recognize carrying a leather folder that had not come to offer condolences. I looked at Harlow's face. I looked at it the way you look at something you once knew well and now need to assess for damage. There was no grief there, no weight. His eyes moved across the door frame before they settled on me. Taking inventory, I realized. Not of me, of what was behind me, of what the house suggested about what I might have. He did not say he was sorry. Not hello. Not, I heard about Declan, and I came because I had to. Nothing that acknowledged that a human being had just left this world. He opened his mouth, and what came out was prepared, measured. The words of a man who had rehearsed in a car on the way over. He said he had heard about his son. His son. I knew how he had heard. The business press had run their tributes within 48 hours of Declan's death. A founder, a visionary, a company valued at $150 million. That kind of coverage travels. It finds people who have been watching from a distance, waiting to see how a story ends. Harlow Dupree had been watching, and when he saw the number he had gotten in a car, he said, as the biological father, he had legal standing in the matter of the estate. He said he had retained counsel, a gesture toward the man with the folder, and that he hoped we could handle everything with minimal disruption. He said he wanted what rightfully belonged to his son's legacy. I stood in my doorway and I listened to every single word. I did not interrupt him. I did not correct the word legacy coming out of the mouth of a man who had not dialed Declan's number once in 30 years. I did not point out that he had left before Declan could walk steadily, that he had looked at a 2-year-old with cerebral palsy and decided that child was not the future he had planned for, that he had built a whole life somewhere else and never looked back. I did not say any of that. When he finished, I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "I will be in touch." That was all. He nodded like a man who had just won something. The lawyer with the folder made a note. They walked back down my front steps and got into a car that was too clean for someone in mourning and drove away. I closed the door. I stood in my hallway alone and I breathed. Not in panic, not in anger. I breathed the way you breathe when something you suspected has just been confirmed, and now you know exactly what you are dealing with. He came to my door talking about his son. His son. The same child he walked away from 30 years ago because a disabled child did not fit the life he was building. He did not say he was sorry. He did not say he was sorry once. I let him finish every word, because I needed to hear exactly how far he was willing to go. Aldwin Crooks called at 7:15 the next morning. He did not say good morning. He said, "Winifred, tell me what I heard is not true. Tell me that man did not come to your house with a lawyer 5 days after we buried Declan." I told him it was true. The silence that followed was not the silence of a man processing information. It was the silence of a man deciding how angry he was allowed to be before he said something he could not take back. Aldwin had worked beside Declan for 11 years. He had watched my son build something extraordinary from the inside. Whatever grief he was carrying about Declan's death had just collided with something that made it burn hotter. He said, "I will have 3 attorneys on this by noon. We are not letting this happen." I told him I appreciated that. I told him to give me a few days. He did not like that answer, but he accepted it because he respected me enough to wait before he acted. Marlene Good was at my door by 10. She did not ring the bell. She knocked the way she has knocked for 31 years. 3 times, firm, like she has every right to be there, because she does. I let her in, and she walked straight to my kitchen table and sat down and looked at me the way only a woman who has known you through everything can look at you, like she was checking the structural integrity of something she had helped build. She said, "Winnie, talk to me." I sat across from her. I told her Harlow Dupree had come to my door. I told her he had a lawyer with him. I told her he had not offered a single word of condolence. Her face did something complicated. Then she leaned forward and she said, "You have to fight this. You know that. You cannot sit here and let that man walk away with what Declan built, what you both built. You cannot do that to his memory." I listened to every word. When she finished, I reached across the table and I covered her hand with mine. I said, "Marlene, let me handle this my way." She searched my face for something that would help her understand. She did not find it. She stayed another hour, said very little. and left with her eyes full of something I recognized as fear, dressed up as worry. My pastor called that afternoon gentle, careful, the way he approaches anything he suspects might shatter if handled wrong. He said the church was behind me. He said I did not have to face this alone. I thanked him and told him the same thing I had told everyone else. Let me handle this my way. By evening, the calls had slowed, but the weight of them had not. I sat in my living room in the quiet, and I thought about all of them. Aldwin, ready to fight. Marlene searching my face, my pastor measuring his words. And I understood that what they were seeing when they looked at me was a woman who had not yet broken down, and that was frightening them more than the man at the door. They expected collapse. What they got was stillness. And stillness, when someone is expecting grief, looks exactly like surrender. It was not surrender. It was the beginning of something I had not yet named out loud, but had already started building the moment I closed my front door on Harlow Dupree and stood alone in my hallway and breathed. My phone rang. Prescott Briggs. He said, Harlow Dupree's attorney made formal contact this afternoon. They are moving quickly. How do you want to proceed? I looked at the wall across from me. I said, good. Tell them I am not going to fight it, but do not act on anything yet. I need a few days before we move. The line went quiet for 3 full seconds. When Prescott spoke again, his voice was even and careful. The voice of a man who had just been told something that surprised him and had decided not to show it. He said, understood. I will hold. I set the phone down. I sat in the quiet of my living room with Birmingham going dark outside my window, and I let the stillness settle around me like something I had chosen rather than something that had found me. Everyone was watching to see what I would do next. Good. Let them watch. What I was about to do next was not something any of them could see coming, including the man who had driven to my door 4 days after burying my son and rehearsed his words in a car that was too clean for mourning. The meeting was my idea. Prescott had advised against it. He said there was nothing to be gained from sitting across from Harlow Dupree before the legal process had formally begun. I told him I was not going for legal reasons. He looked at me the way he has looked at me before when he suspects I know something he does not yet, and asked no further questions. We met at Prescott's office, neutral ground that was not actually neutral, which was also my idea. A conference room on the 14th floor with a long table and windows that looked out over Birmingham like a reminder of what was actually at stake in this city and who had built something worth looking at here. Harlow arrived 7 minutes late. Not enough to be rude, enough to signal that his time had weight. He came in with his lawyer, a man in his 50s who carried himself with the particular confidence of someone accustomed to winning on paperwork alone. They sat across from us, and Harlow settled into his chair like a man who had already decided how this would end. He spoke first. He talked about legacy, about what Declan had represented, about the pride a father feels watching a child succeed even from a distance. He used the word distance the way people use words when they are hoping you will not examine them too closely. He talked about what his son would have wanted. He said, if circumstances had been different, things would have gone another way between them. Circumstances. I sat with that word for a moment. 30 years of silence was a circumstance. Walking away from a 2-year-old because that child's body did not move the way he expected was a circumstance. I looked at Harlow's face while he spoke, and I saw a man who had built a story about himself that he had told so many times he had started to believe it. He still did not say he was sorry. Not for Declan's death. Not for anything. When he finished, I waited 3 seconds. Then I asked him one question. I said, "What do you remember about your son?" The room changed, not loudly. The way pressure changes, something shifting behind the eyes, a barely perceptible adjustment in posture. His lawyer's pen stopped moving. Harlow opened his mouth, and what came out was the shape of an answer without its substance. He mentioned intelligence. He mentioned potential he always believed was there. He spoke in the language of impressions, broad, unanchored, the vocabulary of a man describing someone he had read about rather than someone he had held. He did not say one specific thing, not one memory with a time and a place and a detail that could only come from having actually been there, not one moment that belonged to him and Declan alone. He reached for something real and came back with the outline of a person he had never known. I let him finish. Then I thanked him for coming. I stood. I shook his lawyer's hand, firm, brief, professional. I picked up my bag and I walked out of that conference room without looking back at Harlow Dupree. In the elevator, I stood alone and watched the floor numbers descend. In my car, I sat for exactly 1 minute. Then I called Prescott. I said, "It is time to begin." He said, "I will start this afternoon." I ended the call and sat in the quiet of my car with Birmingham moving around me and something that felt close to certainty settling into my chest like weight finding its level. He could not tell me one true thing about his son. Not one. And that was all I needed. There was a morning in the 3rd year of the company when everything nearly fell apart. A vendor we had built our entire first quarter around pulled their contract without warning. 48 hours notice. The kind of thing that can end a young business before it finds its footing. I found out at 6 in the morning and I called Declan before I had finished reading the email. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what had happened. There was a pause, not panic, just that specific silence of his where I could almost hear him thinking. Then he said, "All right, give me until noon." I said, "Declan, this is not a noon situation. This is a..." He said, "Mama, give me until noon." I gave him until noon. By 11:45, he had replaced the contract with a better one. A company twice the size, terms more favorable, a relationship that would last 9 years and anchor our second phase of growth. I never found out exactly how he did it. When I asked, he just looked at me with that steady expression and said he had made a phone call to someone who owed him a conversation. That was Declan. He did not explain his moves. He made them. While he was making his calls that morning, I was making one of my own. I reached Prescott before 7 and told him I needed the holding company's foundational documents reviewed and current. Every registration, every capitalization record, every filing that established ownership from the beginning. He asked no questions. He said he would have everything pulled by end of week. I had no specific reason that morning beyond the instinct of a woman who had built something carefully and understood that careful things require tending. I did not know then that I was beginning to prepare for something I could not yet name. I only knew the structure underneath everything had to be clean, and I wanted to look at it with fresh eyes. I filed that instinct away and said nothing to Declan. What people who only knew him professionally never understood was how much of what he built came from something quieter than ambition. He used to say he wanted the company to feel like somewhere people arrived and immediately understood they were expected. Not tolerated. Expected. He said too many places make you prove yourself at the door. He wanted ours to be different. To feel like the decision had already been made in your favor before you sat down. He was 31 years old the last time I saw him in his office. He was on the phone and he waved me in without looking up, and I sat in the chair across from his desk and watched him work and thought, there it is. There is everything I was building toward. Sitting right there in that chair, moving through the world on his own terms. His left hand was resting against the desk edge. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. I watched his hand, and I did not say anything. I just sat there and let myself have that moment the way you hold something carefully when you know it is precious and you do not want to disturb it. He hung up the phone and looked at me and said, "You are staring." I said, "I am allowed. I made you." He laughed. That specific laugh that started quiet and then decided to commit. We were locking up one evening not long after, just the 2 of us, the building empty, the city going quiet outside. He stopped at the door and looked back at everything we had built inside that space, and he said, "You know what I love about this place? It already knows what it is. Nobody can walk in here and tell it something different." He was talking about the company, but I heard something underneath it. The way you hear the second meaning in something before the first one has finished landing. I just said, "Come on, it is getting late." He smiled and pulled the door shut behind him. The company knew what it was. And so did I. A man who never took the time to learn either of those things was going to find out exactly how much that had always mattered. Prescott called me at 8 that morning to confirm the instruction before he acted on it. He said, "Winifred, I need you to say it clearly so we are both certain. You want me to communicate full cooperation to Dupree's legal team, no contest, no counterposition, complete openness to the process." I said, "That is exactly what I want." A silence. Then he said, "I will make the call." And I heard in his voice the particular restraint of a man who had more to say and had decided this was not the moment to say it. He had asked me nothing the night before when I first gave the instruction. He was not asking now. That was the particular grace of a man who had worked beside me long enough to know that my silences are not confusion. They are architecture. By mid-morning, Aldwin Crooks knew. I do not know who told him. It did not matter. He called. And the Aldwin on the phone that morning was not the measured professional who had spent 11 years beside my son, building something serious. This was a man whose grief had just been handed something to collide with. He said, "Winifred, what are you doing? Tell me what you are doing, because I am standing here and I cannot make this make sense." I said, "Aldwin, I need you to trust me." He said, "I trust you. I do not understand you, and I need you to help me with that, because right now it looks like you are handing Declan's life's work to a man who did not know him, who chose not to know him. And I cannot." He stopped. I heard him pull in a breath. He said, "I cannot watch that happen and do nothing." I said, "Then do not watch. Trust me and look away for a little while." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I hope you know what you are doing." His voice had dropped into something I had not heard from him before. Not anger anymore. Something closer to grief, finding a new room to sit in. Marlene was at my door by 2. She did not knock the way she usually knocks. She knocked like someone who was trying to hold something together with the force of their knuckles. I opened the door and she came in and stood in my kitchen and looked at me and said, "Someone told me you told Prescott to stand down. Tell me that is not true." I said, "It is true." She put both hands flat on my kitchen counter. She said, "Winnie, people are saying you are grief-stricken, that you are not thinking clearly. I told them that was not you. I told them I knew you better than that. But standing here right now, I need you to give me something because I am running out of things to tell them." I looked at her. I said, "Marlene, I know what I am doing." She searched my face the way she had the first time. This time, what she found there made her go very still. She stayed another 40 minutes, said almost nothing. When she left, she touched my arm at the door, just her hand on my arm for a moment, and walked to her car without looking back. I closed the door. I went to the window and I stood there in the quiet of my house with the afternoon light coming through, and I waited to feel something collapse inside me. It did not. What came instead was something I had not felt since the morning I got the call. Something that was not happiness and was not relief, but was close to both. Something that felt almost like peace. Everyone was looking at what I was giving away. Nobody was looking at what was already mine. And that was exactly how it needed to stay. Right up until the morning, a hearing officer in Birmingham read the documents that told the truth about what had always been mine to keep and what had never been Harlow Dupree's to claim. He thought I had surrendered. I had simply chosen my room. Prescott's office felt different when I walked in that morning. Not the room itself. The room was the same. Same long desk, same wall of files, same window looking out over Birmingham that had watched us build something from paperwork and intention over more than 2 decades. What was different was what we were about to do with everything we had built inside it. He was already seated when I arrived. No pleasantries. He looked at me across the desk and said, "Talk me through what you want." I said, "I want you to let them keep asking the wrong question." He waited. I told him that when I built the company, I did not build it the way most people build things. I did not start with a vision and figure out the structure later. I built the structure first because I understood that everything visible rests on something invisible. And what sits underneath is what actually matters when things get complicated. I registered a holding company, my name, my capitalization. Every dollar that seeded what the world would eventually see came through that entity, and that entity belonged to me alone. Beneath it, I built the operating company, the one with Declan's name on the door, the one that hired people and signed contracts and generated the revenue that made the business press take notice. His title was real. His authority over that company was complete and undivided. Every hire, every negotiation, every strategic decision that built the company's reputation, that was him. Fully. The world was not wrong to call him the man behind it. He was. What the world did not know was the legal architecture underneath the man. Declan held full operational authority and a documented ownership interest in the subsidiary. What he did not hold, what had never been formally transferred despite my intentions, was ownership of the holding entity above it. The company the world valued at $150 million traced back to that holding entity. And that entity was mine alone. Prescott had already confirmed it. The structure held cleanly under Alabama probate law. Nothing Harlow filed could reach what had never belonged to Declan's estate. Prescott said, "And the transfer." I said, "Documented in my estate plan, intended as a milestone, something I was building toward deliberately. It was never executed." Declan knew a transfer was planned as a future milestone. He did not know the paperwork remained incomplete. There was no reason for him to check. He never took out loans against it. He never structured his own affairs around owning it outright. The incompletion was mine alone to carry. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "So when Dupree's team filed their claim against Declan's estate," I said, "they started pulling on a thread that does not lead where they think it leads." He looked at me for a long moment. I watched him do the thing he does when he is running through implications. A slight stillness, eyes not quite focused, processing something at a speed that does not show on his face. He said, "They have been asking what Declan owned." I said, "Yes." He said, "That is the wrong question." I said, "It has always been the wrong question." A man who never took the time to know his son certainly never took the time to understand the difference between a title and a deed. Declan carried the title. I held the deed. Harlow Dupree's lawyer has been building a case on what the world believed and not on what the documents say. Prescott leaned back in his chair. I said, I am not going to correct him. He said, I need to pull every foundational document and have them ready, and I want to begin drafting the enforcement motion today. I said, I know. That is why I am here. I left his office 40 minutes later and walked to my car in the morning air, and Birmingham moved around me the way it always does. Steady, indifferent, continuing without pause. There is a difference between what a man thinks he is walking into and what is actually waiting for him inside. His lawyer was about to find out exactly what that difference felt like. Aldwin told me the story about 3 weeks after Declan died. We were sitting in the company's main conference room, the one Declan had insisted on furnishing with chairs that were the same on every side of the table because he said hierarchy should live in results, not in furniture. Aldwin had come to discuss some operational matters that could not wait, and somewhere in the middle of it, he stopped talking about business and said, "There is something I have been meaning to tell you. Something I should have told you while he was alive, but I kept thinking there would be time. There is never as much time as you think." He told me it happened at an industry conference 2 years ago. Declan had been invited to speak on a panel, 5 executives, a moderator, a room of about 300 people. Before the panel began, one of the other executives, a man whose name I will not say because he does not deserve the space, leaned toward Declan at the table and said quietly enough that he thought no one else could hear, "Are you sure you are in the right room?" He said it the way people say things when they want to wound without witnesses. Aldwin was seated in the front row. He heard it. He told me he watched Declan go still for exactly 1 second. Just one. Then Declan turned and looked at that man with the expression I knew. Steady, patient. The one that gave people a moment to correct themselves before he moved on without them. He said nothing in response. Nothing at all. The panel began. The moderator asked the first question, and over the next 45 minutes, Declan Morrow answered every question put to him with the kind of precision and depth that made the other panelists start taking notes. By the third question, the room had shifted in the way rooms shift, when they realize they have been in the presence of something they were not prepared for. By the end, there was a line of people waiting to speak to him specifically. The man who had leaned over was not in that line. Aldwin said, "I watched the whole room recalibrate in real time, and Declan never once acknowledged that anything had happened. He just did what he always did. He let the work speak and walked out of that room like a man who had somewhere more important to be." He paused. Then he said, "I never told him I saw it. I did not want to give it more space than he had given it. But I have thought about it every week since." When Aldwin finished, he reached into the folder in front of him and slid a document across the table. Harlow Dupree's legal team had filed their formal probate claim that morning. He had printed it and brought it without saying so, because he knew I would want to see it the moment it existed, and he knew me well enough not to make a production of handing it over. I looked at the document. I looked at Harlow's name printed at the top of a legal filing, asserting himself as biological father of record, staking a claim on everything a man he had never known had built. I set it down. I said, "Good. That is exactly what we needed him to do." Aldwin looked at me the way he had been looking at me for weeks, searching for a seam in the stillness, trying to find what I was not saying. He did not find it. He nodded once and began gathering his papers. I thought about Harlow Dupree sitting somewhere across 30 years of chosen distance, never knowing the conference story existed, not knowing any of the stories. All the rooms Declan walked into and recalibrated without raising his voice. All the moments that accumulated into a life Harlow had forfeited before it began. A man who walks away from his child does not get to claim the man that child becomes. He made that choice at a door 30 years ago. He was about to find out that some choices do not expire. They just wait. Prescott called me on a Tuesday morning and said, "I found it." I knew what he meant before he finished the sentence. I told him I would be there within the hour. When I walked into his office, he had a file open on the desk between us. Not a digital file, a physical one. Manila folder, worn at the edges, the kind of weight that comes from paper that has been sitting in storage for a long time, waiting for someone to need it. He slid it across to me, and I opened it and looked at the first page and felt something settle in my chest that had been waiting a long time to settle. The order was dated 30 years ago, 4 months after Harlow Dupree left. I had not simply absorbed his absence and moved forward. That was not who I was, and it was not what Declan deserved. I had gone to court. I had documented everything: the abandonment, the established paternity, the legal record of a man who was a father and had chosen to stop being one. The court had agreed with me. They issued a child support order, monthly payments, clearly specified, legally binding. He disappeared instead. I did not chase him. I had a child to raise, and I raised him. But I filed the non-compliance. I kept every document the court generated. And every year that passed without a payment, the arrears accumulated under the terms of the original order, and the statutory interest compounded on top of what he owed. And the number grew in the way that numbers grow when time is added to neglect. I told Prescott to walk me through the total. He did. The direct costs first. Declan's medical care specific to cerebral palsy was not inexpensive. Physical therapy from age 2 through age 19, weekly, sometimes twice weekly in the years when his development needed the most support. Specialized equipment that had to be upgraded as he grew, mobility aids, adaptive devices, tools that allowed him to move through the world on his own terms. Occupational therapy, specialist consultations, medications. The particular and ongoing cost of raising a child whose needs required more than standard provision and doing it entirely alone when a court had ruled I should not have to. Then the years. Prescott laid them out methodically, 12 months at a time. What was owed each year, what was never paid, what the interest added to the principal at the statutory rate. I sat across from him and I listened to every number without interrupting. By the time he reached the present, the figure on the page was not a small one. I sat with it. I thought about Harlow Dupree sitting in his car outside my house 4 days after Declan died, rehearsing his words, calculating what he stood to collect. I thought about his lawyer with the leather folder. I thought about the word circumstances. Then I thought about something else. A court order does not expire because the man it named decided to disappear. It does not dissolve because decades passed and nobody chased him. It sits in the record exactly where it was placed, and it waits. What reactivates it, what introduces a man formally and legally to an obligation he buried under 30 years of distance, is his own voluntary claim. His own formal assertion of biological parenthood entered into a legal proceeding of his own choosing. He was about to do exactly that. Prescott set down his pen and looked at me. He said, "I have already drafted the motion. We file it as a separate enforcement action in family court, and simultaneously move to have it consolidated into the probate proceeding. His voluntary appearance to assert paternity gives us the jurisdictional bridge we need. A single judicial order brings both matters into the same hearing room. The arrears, the statutory interest, the documented non-compliance, all of it lands in front of the same officer on the same morning. Everything in one room." I looked at the folder on the desk between us. 30 years of silence sitting in a manila envelope with worn edges. I said, "File it." I kept every receipt, every bill. Every document from every year, he was nowhere. I kept them the way you keep something you always believed would matter one day. That day was almost here. 3 days before the hearing, Aldwin stopped calling. Not because he had given up. I understood that. Aldwin Crooks does not give up on things he believes in, and whatever complicated feeling he had about what I was doing, he had never stopped believing in me. The silence was something else. It was the silence of a man who had run out of arguments and was now sitting with the outcome he could not prevent, and trying to make his peace with it before it arrived. He sent one message. 4 words. I am here regardless. I read it twice and set my phone face down on the table and sat with the particular weight of being loved by someone who does not understand you but has decided to stay anyway. That is not a small thing. I did not take it as a small thing. Marlene sent a message that same morning. She did not ask how I was feeling. She knew me well enough to know that question would not land the way she meant it. She said, I made your favorite. It is in a container on your porch. You do not have to call me back. I went to the porch and the container was there. I brought it inside and I stood in my kitchen and I ate standing up because sitting down felt like more stillness than I could manage in that moment. And I thought about 31 years of a friendship that had learned exactly how to love me without requiring me to explain myself. That afternoon, I went to Prescott's office. This visit was different from the others. The earlier meetings had been about building, pulling documents, drafting motions, confirming the legal architecture was sound. This one was about finishing. He had everything prepared. The foundational documents were organized in sequence. The child support enforcement filing had been joined to the probate proceeding by judicial order 4 days prior. The disclosure package had been held until the last legally permitted moment. Delivered at 11:47 the night before, 13 minutes inside the court deadline. He walked me through the sequence one final time. Not because I needed to hear it again, but because he needed to say it again, which is a different thing entirely. When he finished, he closed the folder and looked at me across the desk and said, Winifred, are you certain? I knew he was not asking about the strategy. He had built the strategy with me. He understood every moving part of it. He was asking about something underneath the strategy, about the woman who had been carrying all of this through weeks of grief and silence, and being misread by people she loved. He was asking if that woman was still standing. I looked at him for a long moment. I said, my son spent his entire life being certain about things the world told him he had no right to be certain about. Every room he walked into had already made a decision about him before he opened his mouth. He walked in anyway. Every time. Without apology and without performance. Just certainty. Quiet and absolute. I said, I learned that from watching him. I did not learn it anywhere else. Prescott looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded once. He did not ask again. I drove home alone as the city moved into evening around me. Birmingham at dusk has a particular quality of light, amber and long and unhurried. I watched it through my window and I thought about Aldwin and Marlene and my pastor and everyone who had looked at me these past weeks and seen a woman coming apart. I thought about what Harlow's lawyer was doing at that exact moment. Somewhere across the city, a man in a press suit was sitting with a package that had arrived too late in the evening to read carefully and too early in the morning to ignore. He was skimming, confirming, telling himself he had seen enough to walk into that room tomorrow. He had not seen enough. I was not looking forward to being right. I was looking forward to it being over. There is a difference. My son would have understood that difference immediately. I did not go home after dinner. I drove to the building instead. Let myself in through the side entrance the way I had done 1,000 times over the years. when the office was empty and the city was quiet, and I needed to think inside something we had built rather than outside it. The security guard at the desk looked up and nodded, and I nodded back, and took the elevator to the 4th floor without saying anything to anyone. Declan's office was exactly as he had left it. His assistant had asked me twice what I wanted done with it. Both times I had said, "Nothing yet. Leave it as it is." She had understood without requiring explanation, which is the particular grace of someone who had worked beside him for 6 years and knew that some things should not be rushed. I pushed the door open and stood in the doorway for a moment before I went in. The room held him. That is the only way I know to say it. Not in a mystical sense, but in the specific sense of a space that carries the accumulated presence of a person who spent real time inside it. The arrangement of things on the desk, the angle of the chair, a coffee mug he had washed and left upside down on a small towel beside the window because he was particular about not leaving rings on the wood. Before I sat down, I went to his desk and opened the left drawer. He kept a single folder there. Nothing labeled, nothing formal. Just documents he wanted within reach. I had put a copy of the consolidated filing order inside it 2 days prior, after Prescott confirmed the family court enforcement action had been joined to the probate proceeding. I needed to see it one more time in this room, in his space. I needed to hold the paper that represented everything the morning was going to say and feel the weight of it where he used to work. I read it once, slowly. Then I folded it along its original crease and put it back. I sat in the chair across from his desk, the one I had sat in the last time I saw him alive. I reached across and picked up the mug, turned it over in my hands. Ordinary, white. A small chip on the handle from when he had knocked it against something and not bothered to replace it because it still worked. And Declan did not discard things that still worked. I held it and I talked to him the way we always talked. I told him what was going to happen in the morning. I told him about the documents and about Prescott and about the order I had filed 30 years ago and kept in a folder he never knew existed. I told him that the man who came to collect his name was about to find out that his name was never what was actually at stake. I told him why I had built it the way I built it, why I had put him at the front of everything, why I had not completed the transfer, not because I was withholding something, but because I wanted the moment to match the man he had become. I wanted to hand it to him correctly. I was still building toward that. I told him I was sorry I ran out of time. I told him I was not sorry about tomorrow. I set the mug back down carefully, upside down, on the small towel beside the window where he had left it. I was not ready to move anything. Not yet. I sat in the quiet, and I let the night settle around me. What came was not peace exactly. Something steadier than peace. The feeling of a woman who has carried something a long distance and can see the place where she is going to set it down. I thought about what he used to say at the end of every phone call. Never goodbye. Always. All right, Mama. I will talk to you. Like the conversation was only pausing, like there was always going to be more to say and we both knew it. And there was no urgency in that because the time was not going anywhere. I will talk to you. I have been holding those words since the morning the phone went warm in my hand. They are the ones I reach for when the grief gets loud and everything else falls away. Not a grand moment, not a speech. Just the ordinary sound of my son telling me he would be back. I turned off the light. I said, I will see you in the morning. I always felt like he could hear me. I still do. I arrived 40 minutes early. The courthouse was quiet at that hour. The particular quiet of a building that has not yet filled with the weight of the day's business. I signed in at the front, cleared security, and walked down the corridor to the assigned hearing room, without stopping to check my phone or adjust anything about myself. I had chosen my clothes the night before. Navy. Not mourning. Not performance. The colors of a woman who knows where she is going and has already decided how she will stand when she gets there. I sat at the table on our side and I placed my hands flat on the surface and I looked at the room. Prescott arrived 12 minutes later. He sat beside me and opened his portfolio and said, "Everything is in order." I nodded. We did not say anything else. There was nothing left to say that had not already been said in his office, in my kitchen, in the months of careful and deliberate preparation that had brought us to this specific chair in this specific room on this specific morning. Harlow arrived at 9. He came through the door with his lawyer beside him and the particular energy of a man who has already written the ending of a story he has not yet finished reading. The briefcase, the pressed jacket, the way he scanned the room before he sat, not looking for threats, looking for confirmation that everything was arranged the way he expected. He did not look at me when he sat down. Then he did. Our eyes met across the room, and he gave me the kind of nod that men give when they believe they have already won, and are trying to be gracious about it. I looked back at him steadily and said nothing. I noticed again what I had noticed at my door and in Prescott's conference room, and every time I had been in a room with this man. No grief, no weight of loss, just focus. The focused expression of someone who came to collect something and is running the numbers in his head while the formalities proceed around him. What Harlow did not know, what his lawyer had not had adequate time to fully process, was that Prescott had delivered the complete documentation package at the precise stroke of the court-mandated disclosure deadline. Not a day early. Not an hour. The filing arrived at 11:47 on a Thursday night, legal by 13 minutes. His team had received it. They had confirmed receipt. But confirming receipt and fully absorbing what is inside a package of that complexity are two entirely different things. One takes a moment. The other takes time. His lawyer had not been given. He had shown up that morning with the posture of a man who had skimmed enough to feel safe. He had not read enough to be safe. The proceedings began. The hearing officer reviewed the consolidated filing, the probate matter and the family court enforcement action together, joined by judicial order 2 days prior. The documents were presented in sequence. When my signature was required, I signed, each one placed without hesitation, without drama, with the quiet precision of a woman who is not surrendering anything, because there is nothing on this table that belongs to anyone but her. I watched Harlow watch me sign. I saw the moment his shoulders released. A subtle thing. The almost imperceptible relaxation of a man who has just interpreted composure as defeat. His lawyer received the full document package. He opened it with the efficiency of someone who believes he is performing a formality. He began to read. The room held its pace for 45 seconds. Normal. Procedural. The sound of papers and a climate system and the distant corridor. Then the lawyer's pen slowed. He turned back a page. His eyes moved across a line again. Then back further. His hand went still against the paper, the way a hand goes still when the mind has stopped moving forward and started moving back through something it needs to read again. Across the room, the hearing officer had gone quiet in a different way. Not the procedural quiet of a proceeding running its course, but the particular stillness of someone who has just read something that changes the shape of the morning. She set her copy down slowly. She did not speak yet, but her eyes moved to Prescott, and something passed between them that required no words at all. I watched the lawyer turn that page back, and I folded my hands on the table in front of me, and I waited. The lawyer turned another page. Then he stopped. Not the gradual slowing of someone moving carefully through dense material. A stop. The kind that happens when the mind has processed something and needs a moment before the body catches up. His hand rested flat on the page, and he did not move it. And the room, which had been running at its normal procedural pace, suddenly had a different quality to it. The way air changes before weather arrives. I watched him read the same section again. The holding company, the legal entity registered in my name alone, the foundation that owned the operating company, the structure that every material asset of the business ultimately traced back to when you followed the paperwork far enough, was the first thing his eyes had found. It was registered in my name. It had always been registered in my name. Declan held the chairmanship and the chief executive title of the operating subsidiary beneath it. His authority over that company had been complete and real. His vision had built everything the world recognized and celebrated. But the holding company had never transferred to him. The planned transfer was documented in my personal estate plan. It was intended. It was prepared. It had never been executed. What Harlow Dupree had filed a claim against was his son's estate. His son's estate contained Declan's personal assets, his compensation, his minority interest in the operating subsidiary. It did not contain the company. The company was not Declan's to leave. It had never legally been his to leave. The lawyer looked up at his client. Harlow's face did something I had not seen it do in any of our encounters. The certainty left it. Not gradually. Suddenly. The way a light changes when the source is interrupted. His mouth did not open. His face simply asked a question his voice had not yet found. The lawyer looked back down. He kept reading. I watched him reach the second section, and I watched the change move through him differently this time. Not confusion, something quieter and more final than confusion. He reached the child support order, the original filing, 30 years old, paternity established, payments ordered, non-compliance documented, arrears compounded annually at the statutory rate across 3 decades of complete absence. He reached the figure those 30 years had produced. He set the document down slowly. He looked at nothing for a moment. Just a man and a page, and the specific silence of someone doing arithmetic they did not expect to be doing. What Harlow had done by filing his claim, by submitting his own paperwork, his own formal assertion of biological parenthood into the legal record of this proceeding, was introduce himself, formally, officially, to an obligation a court had established before his son could walk steadily across a room. That order had not expired. His disappearance had not canceled it, and his voluntary appearance here had handed the jurisdiction exactly what it needed to enforce what had been waiting 30 years to be enforced. He came to collect a legacy that was never his son's to leave. He had claimed a debt that had always been his to pay. The lawyer set the full package down. He did not look at his client. Immediately, he looked at the page in front of him. Then he looked at Prescott. Then his eyes moved briefly to the hearing officer, who had been watching the exchange with the composed attention of someone who had already read what he was only now finding. She gave nothing away. She did not need to. Then Harlow said his lawyer's name. Once. Just his name. The word landing in the room like something dropped from a height. The lawyer turned. I watched Harlow's face search for words that were not going to help either of them find their way out of what his own filing had just built around him. I stood. I buttoned my jacket. I leaned toward Prescott and thanked him quietly. I picked up nothing from the table because I had brought nothing to the table. I walked toward the door at the pace of a woman who has somewhere to be and has finished here completely. I did not look at Harlow Dupree. Not once. I did not need to. Behind me, I heard him say something. I do not know what it was. I was already gone. I did not go home. I drove to the building the way I had driven there the night before, not because I had planned to, but because it was where I needed to be, and my hands knew it before my mind caught up. I parked in my usual space and let myself in through the side entrance and nodded at the same security guard and took the elevator to the 4th floor. I did not go to Declan's office this time. I went to the conference room at the end of the hall, the one with the long table and the chairs that were the same on every side. The one where he had run his first senior leadership meeting at 24 years old and come out of it 2 hours later and found me in the corridor and said, "I think that went well," with the particular understatement of a man who knew exactly how well it had gone and did not need anyone to confirm it. I sat at the head of the table, his chair, the one he always chose. I sat there in the quiet and I let the morning settle around me. Prescott called before noon. He did not need to say much. The hearing officer had ruled. The probate claim was dismissed. There was nothing in Declan's estate that touched the holding company, and the documentation had made that plain beyond any reasonable argument. The child support enforcement order had been activated and formalized. Harlow Dupree had come to this city to collect a legacy. He was leaving with a judgment against his name and 30 years of compounded obligation following him out the door. The call lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, I set the phone face down on the table and sat with the silence a little longer. I thought about Declan, not the hearing, not the documents, not Harlow Dupree sitting somewhere beginning to understand the full weight of what his own filing had handed him. I thought about my son, the specific way he looked at me when he was proud of something, not announcing it, just a particular quality of stillness, like he was making sure I was seeing what he was seeing. I thought about Aldwin and Marlene and my pastor and everyone who had loved me through these weeks without understanding what I was doing. There was no bitterness in me toward any of them. Fear looks like panic when you are watching someone you love walk towards something you cannot see clearly. I had understood that while it was happening. I had forgiven it before any of them knew they needed forgiving. I thought about what this company had meant when we started it and what it means now that the truth of it has been spoken aloud in a room that required it. I never lied. Not once. I told them to let him have everything, and I meant it completely. There was nothing of mine to give him. There was nothing of Declan's that could reach what I had built and held and protected from the beginning. When I said, "Let him have it," I already knew there was nothing there for him to take. That was not cruelty. That was 30 years of careful preparation finally finding its moment. He carried his own weight. He always had. And I carried mine. Triumph is loud. I have never been interested in loud. What I felt sitting in that chair in that quiet room was something different. The specific feeling of having set something heavy down after carrying it a long distance. Not relief, exactly. Completion. The silence after something has finally been resolved into what it was always supposed to be. I thought about the last time he called me. A Tuesday. Nothing significant. No milestone. No crisis. No reason beyond the fact that he was driving somewhere and wanted to talk. When he was ready to go, he said what he always said. "All right, Mama. I will talk to you. Not goodbye. Never goodbye." I used to take that for granted the way you take for granted the things that have always been true. I did not know that Tuesday was the last time I would hear him say it. I know it now. I will run this company the way he ran it, with the same insistence on dignity, the same certainty, the same refusal to let a room decide what is possible before the work has had its say. That is not grief. That is inheritance. I will talk to you, Declan. I always will.